Getting the books out to prepare for this video has made me really regret not doing wrap-ups as I've gone along this year. Hi everyone, my name is Chloe, welcome back to my channel, thank you for being here today. Today's video is going to be a reading wrap-up for the last however many months of the year. Basically the last time I did a reading wrap-up I believe was up to the end of August. I'm now going to wrap up everything that I've read from September to December. This could potentially be a very long video, so I'm going to try and keep it short and sweet. I've just done a theatre version of this and I rambled way too much, so I'm going to try and limit myself to just a couple of sentences about each of these books. We will see how it goes, and not too much else to say. I don't have stats like I normally do because I've sort of been tracking my reading differently. I haven't been using spreadsheet like I used to. I've literally just been using Goodreads. It's basically what my brain has been able to manage. So we're just going to dive straight into it and start with the first book that I read at the beginning of September. Actually, I should say that I don't have every single book to hand here. Some of them are actually in the house, but they are downstairs and I've not gone to go and get them right now. Some of them are on my shelves, but they're just really difficult to reach. A lot of them were ebooks or audiobooks and I don't have the physical one to hold up. I am not going to set myself the challenge of actually editing in the picture for each of them because that is again too much for my brain to handle at the minute. So I will just make sure I say the name of the book as I talk about each of them so you know what I'm talking about, but I'm very sorry that I'm not physically holding them up as we speak. So let's move on to the first book that I read in the month of September, and that one was one that I do actually have to hand, and it is Double Booked by Lily Linden. This is about a woman who is kind of figuring out her life in regards to her sexuality, and essentially throughout this book she's kind of leading two lives, trying to figure out who she is. And I gave this book a 3.5 star. I did like the concept of it. I think there was some issues with the execution. I did just want to yell at the main character a lot of times, but that's not affecting my star rating because people are allowed to be messy. But I sadly didn't love this as much as I thought I would, but I'm glad that I read it. Next up is one that I don't have because Becca's going to murder me when I say this, but I've unhauled this book. It was Love Theoretically by Ali Hazelwood. I had the Afterlight editions of all the Ali Hazelwood ones, and the more Ali Hazelwood I read, the more I've realised I'm just not that bothered about them. They're not bad by any means. I really enjoyed reading The Love Hypothesis, but so a lot of the criticism that gets said about Ali Hazelwood is that every book feels like the same story, and I know that for some people that is fine because they really enjoy that story so they want to read it multiple times. For me, I think because the stories were so repetitive, every time I was noticing things about the writing that I didn't like as much. And I'm not saying I won't read another Ali Hazelwood one because I probably will at some point, but I'm not going to get the special editions because I really don't need them on my shelves. This one I gave a 3.5 star. I can't even remember what it was that I disliked about this one more than some of the others, which is probably saying something. It's been a little bit forgettable in my brain, but I'm glad that the people that do like Ali Hazelwood books get to enjoy them. Sadly, they're just not the perfect books for me. Moving on to a romance that I did really enjoy. This one I got 5 stars. It was Happy Place by Emily Henry. I don't particularly own this one at the minute and haven't gone and stolen Meg's copy, but I've read all of Emily Henry's adult romances this year. This is probably my second favourite. I did really enjoy this, but there's something about Book Lovers that is just my favourite. I love it so much. I spoke about that one before. Let's move on. Happy Place, I really enjoyed the setup of this. I like the sort of second chance romance element to it. I had a great time. I'm really looking forward to the next Emily Henry book that comes out. Then the next books that I read was, I actually read a duology in its entirety, so I'm just going to talk about them both together. It's my first books by this author this year, but not my last. It is A River Enchanted and A Fire Endless by Rebecca Ross. These books, I gave the first one 4 stars. I gave the second one 5 stars. I really enjoyed this duology. I think the reason why the second one was just a little bit higher is that it felt like there was a lot of work done in the first one to kind of build the world and build your connections to these characters, and then that really paid off in the second one, whereas the first one I felt like a lot of work was done but not that much action happened. This had kind of the best of both. I was already really invested in these characters, but then also we had the actual conclusion of the storyline as well. Overall, a really good duology. I really like Rebecca Ross's writing style. I love how she writes romances. I was so here for all the romances and the characters in this, and I did read another Rebecca Ross book later on in the year, and I will talk about that soon, and it's very similar sort of just glowing praise of it. I really want to read more from this writer now. I'm really glad that I ended up buying the special edition of the second one because I had the first one and I got the second one when they had some a restock of it. I think they had some leftover stock after it sold out in its first run, and I'm glad that I ended up getting it now because so good. Then I have a book that if you watch my last TBR that I put up, not the one that's like just gone up in the last couple of days, but my last like one before I then just didn't post videos for a while, I kept saying like, I think this book is going to be awful, and then it's ridiculous because I enjoyed it so much. It was Once More with Feeling by Alyssa Sussman. This is a romance set in the world of musical theatre, and of course that was going to be something that I enjoyed, but I really expected it to be like really ridiculous. I think I was worried that I was going to really love the concept but the execution was going to be bad, but I actually really enjoyed the writing of this. Like, there are definite flaws with it, but I had a great time. I could not put it down. I have another book by this author to read now, and I'm so excited to carry on with her writing because yeah, just everything I wanted it to be from a romance set in the world of musical theatre. Then I read the next book in the Bridgerton series. I am over halfway now. I read To Sir Philip with Love, which I believe is book 5, and this is Eloisa's book. I am not going to spoil too much of the synopsis of this because I feel like obviously if you're watching the TV show and you've not read the books, you maybe don't want to know anything at all, but I didn't love this one as much as some of the others. I gave it 3 stars. I think Eloise as a character is very different in the book than she is in the TV show. I do prefer her in the show, but sadly I just didn't connect with the romance as much in this one. I'm really intrigued to see whether they go down this route in the show because I really think they could just completely change it. But yeah, not my favourite, but not my least favourite. That one's probably the first one. Anyway, moving on. The next book that I read this year was Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. I have owned this book since it first came out. I've got the Waterstones exclusive edition. And every month I sort of said I wanted to read it, but then just never picked it up. And I'm really glad that I actually finally did. I gave this one 5 stars. I really enjoyed it. It's a weird one to kind of explain and recommend because it's one of those like quite quiet books for a lot of it, where it is just sort of the life of these 2 people who make games, and obviously there are events that happen throughout it. There's a lot of sort of like interpersonal stuff that happens throughout it. Felt very quiet, and I was kind of wondering what the point was, and then something happened later on. I was like, oh okay, there we go, and I just wasn't quite expecting it, and I think that was probably the reaction I was supposed to have to it, is how I reacted to this book. And yeah, I just really liked the writing in this. It felt like a story that was simultaneously very big because it spanned like a large section of their life, but also very small, and it just really worked for me. Then I finally read another one that's just been sat on my shelves for ages and I've not been picking up. That was Middle Game by Seanan McGuire, and I really can't give you coherent thoughts on this one because it's, when people say it's confusing, it's not confusing in a way. Like, as you're reading it, it's very easy to follow along with what's actually happening, but I can't tell you why anything happened in this book. I mean, I can, but it's like, it's a strange one to explain. I had a good time. I do really like Seanan McGuire's writing style. I've read a lot of the Wayward Children books before. This is the first sort of full-length novel that I've read. It was very much one where I was just along for the ride. Like I said, I knew what was happening, but I couldn't explain why for a lot of it. And but for me that didn't really matter because the writing was so good, and like I said, just very much there to follow on the journey wherever it was going to lead. The next up we have one that I can't actually physically get to on my shelf at the minute because it is too high and I'm worried things will fall. It's a second book in the Double Trouble Society series by Carrie Hill Fletcher. It's a children's book set in this place where in the first book there were witches that they had to sort of fight, and then in this book there were like werewolves and vampires and things as well. It's just like a spooky children's book, and it's about these 2 girls who called the Double Trouble Society who kind of fight these things in their hometown. And I'm not going to give you too many thoughts on this one because I'm very much not the intended audience, but I still had a good time reading it. I feel like children would enjoy this book. It's obviously not going to be something that ever makes it onto my favourites list, but I'm still glad that I read it. Ones that I'm less glad that I read, the next book was True Life by Jay Kristoff. I'm actually not sure if I should have included Deviate, the second book, in this wrap up, but I think I did. I think that should have been the first book in this wrap up. So let's just talk about both of them. I did not enjoy the series. I've already spoken about me not liking Lifelike before. I think that the series got worse in the second book because we very much were following one character in the first book and then we just completely abandoned them for the second one, and we ended up following my least favourite character and just did not care for it. And then the third book kind of combined it all together and it made it a little bit easier for me to read, but I just did not have a good time. I've done live shows on these books for Christopher They are on mine and Lisa's channel if you want to see full thoughts. Actually, we didn't do a live show for the third one because neither of us had a good time. I don't even think Lisa's read it, but yeah, sadly just not something I enjoyed, so let's move on from it because I don't want to carry on being negative. Luckily the next book that I read was a 5-star. I really enjoyed it. This was The Whispering Dark by Kelly Andrew. This one just had, again, I keep mentioning writing style, but it had really beautiful writing throughout. It also had the romance in this. Like, as soon as the sort of 2 characters met each other on page, I was like, I am here for this. It's got kind of the academia setting in there, which is something that I do tend to enjoy in books. Like I said, particularly in this, it was just sort of the prose and then the relationship between the two main characters. I could not put it down. I'm really, really glad that I picked this up. Kelly Andrew has another book coming out in 2024 and I'm very excited to read that one. I can never remember what it's called though, but I'm very excited to read it whenever it does come out. Then the next book I read, again, it's downstairs and I haven't been able to get to it, but it is Lore Olympus Volume 4. I read 2. I've now caught up on the series because Volume 5 will come up later on. This is a graphic novel, Hades and Persephone retelling. I do struggle sometimes, every time I pick up one of these, I struggle to remember who each of the characters are because there is no sort of explanation of who they are. Like there's no kind of recap at the beginning, and I know that's very much on me of remembering who they are, but a lot of them feel like they look fairly similar, and I'm just like, okay, which one of this? There's so many people in Greek myths, but once I get into them I get very absorbed in them, so I end up giving them 5 stars, even though it always takes me a minute or two to get invested. But I'm really happy with how the story is now progressing. It's very slow burn at the beginning and we're finally getting to points where things are starting to happen, particularly in Volume 5, which I will talk about soon. The next book that I read was Pumpkin Spice Cafe by Laurie Gilmore. This one is one that, like, it sounded like it was an episode of the Gilmore Girls in the synopsis. It kind of was that. It kind of wasn't. I do wish that there are just some things with the execution that I wish would have been a bit better, but overall it was the fun, cute autumn romance that I wanted it to be. I think I gave it like 3.5 to 4 stars. It was a good time. The next one that I read is one that I was like slightly worried about whether or not I would like it, and also I'd picked it for Lisa and Jem's podcast, so I was worried about whether or not they would like it, and it is The Pallbearers Club by Paul Tremblay. I'm really glad to say that I gave this one 5 stars. I really, really liked it. It's a strange book where basically you have one person's telling the story and then someone else is jumping in and going, well, actually, I don't think this is quite right. And there's like things to do with vampires in here, or are there vampires? That is the whole question of it. You're very much left not knowing who to believe at the end of it. You have to kind of pick where you fall on this, and depending on when you ask me, my opinion could change. I really, really enjoyed this. I kind of do want to go through and reread it and see, like, knowing how it ends, is there things that I can pick up on throughout it. Really, really good. Not going to be a book for everyone, but I had a great time. Then the next book that I have is actually just here, but it involves moving so many little statues to get to it that I've just not picked it up, and it is The Fragile Threads of Power by V. Schwab. This is the first book in the new trilogy set in the Shades of Magic world. I gave this one 4 stars. I think it was a very, very good start to this new trilogy. I think obviously we had to catch up on a lot of stuff that had happened in the 7 years in between the first series and this series, so it did sort of slow down like a little bit of the pacing. Also then having to get used to some of the new characters, it just, like, there was a lot going on, which is why it wasn't a 5 star, because I just think now that I'm settled in the world, there is very much chance that the rest of them are going to be 5 stars. But that is also how I felt with the first series, in all fairness. The first book got a 4 star for that, and then the rest of them got 5. I am particularly, I'm trying to try not to say spoilers, because the way that V. Schwab has explained it is that anyone that survived the first series will be in the second series. There is one particular couple that I really, really liked, and I really like how they took their relationship in this new series. Sort of their family that was being built, which will give it away as to, if you read it, as to which couple I'm talking about. But like, that was just my favourite part of this entire book, and I'm glad that they were actually such a big part of it as well, because I was a bit worried that like maybe we're not going to focus on them, but we did a lot, and I really, really enjoyed it. Next book that we have is the final book in a series, and I'm very happy to say that this entire series got 5 stars. Although technically this book maybe shouldn't have 5 stars, but I was very much in my feels by this point because I enjoyed this series so much. It was The Raven King, the last book in the Raven Cycle by Maggie Stiefvater. Again, there's not much I can say about this because it is the conclusion of the series, but by this point I was so invested with the characters. I really like where a lot of the relationships of the characters have gone, because I feel like one of my issues I did have with sort of the middle book in the series is I knew a little bit about kind of where it was heading towards in this one, and it made me less invested in some of the things that happened earlier on, because I knew that it wasn't necessarily heading in that direction. Like, I could see that there was going to be a change, but by the time we got to that in sort of the third book and then this one, I was very much on board. And also Maggie Stiefvater's writing is really, really good. Like, I did very much enjoy the series. I'm very glad I got the Fairy Loot editions because they're pretty, although I don't love the original covers. So at some point I may change them to the reverse covers that we have, but we will see. Then the next book that I read was another one where I just really like the writing. Every book I feel like I've said I really like the writing in here. I should mention most of those were Meg recommendations because she is also a fan of very pretty writing and she gives me a lot of those recommendations. So thank you to her for that. She does feel very smug when people enjoy her recommendations, so I thought I would shout her out for it. But the next one was A Far Wilder Magic by Alison Saft. This cover is beautiful and the story is beautiful. I gave this one 4 stars. I think I had some issues with the actual like plotting and story of it, but again, the writing and the romance, incredible. I'm really looking forward to reading other books by Alison Saft. There are 2 in this house I believe that I can read soon, so looking forward to reading those. But I don't really have any more coherent thoughts about this one. I'm really sorry, like this feels like a wrap up where I'm not really saying very much, but it's less of a review than my normal wrap-ups are because I read some of these quite a while ago, and the way my brain works with books is that once I've read them I tend to just kind of remember vibes of them rather than like specifics, plot details or anything like that. And like I said, what I remember, this is writing a romance, so that is all you're getting. I'm very sorry. Hopefully normal service will resume as I start doing these monthly instead. To be honest, no one wants me to talk for too long because otherwise this video is going to be ridiculous. The next book that I read was a reread. It was Illuminate by Jay Kristoff and Amy Kaufman. This is the 3rd time I've read this book and it was the 2nd time I gave it 5 stars. We've all heard the story where the first time I read it I gave it 2 stars and then on the reread it got 5 stars. Happy to say it is still a 5-star. I didn't sort of dock it down. I really enjoyed this. We read it for Christopher Long. The live show for this is on my channel if you would like to know full thoughts of it. But I will say this time I read it but I also listened to the audiobook at the same time and that was a very different experience, and I'm really glad that I've done that sort of more all-encompassing method. I think there are pros and cons to both reading it physically and listening to it. I think there are some visual aspects that you do need to see, particularly in the 2nd and 3rd book in this series, but I do think that the audio, like with some of the like creepier bits towards the end of this one in particular, really works. So if you're going to read it, I do recommend that. But like I said, if you want to know full thoughts on this one, head to the live show that will be linked somewhere further back on my channel. Next up we have a book that I really wanted to love because I know one of my friends really loves this, but I've realised that this author is just not for me because it's the 2nd book I've read by them and like not hated but just felt a little bit underwhelmed, and it is My Best Friend's Exorcism by Grady Hendrix. It is a horror book about a girl whose friend needs an exorcism basically, and from like the cover of it, like obviously it's giving sort of like 80s 90s retro vibes to it, and I was like ready to have a really good time and then I just didn't. Like there was nothing like I said particularly bad about it, it just I didn't care too much personally. I can't explain it any other way than that. I just wasn't too fussed by it, but like I said, not a bad book in any way. I can understand why some people would like it. It's just very much not one for me. So I'm officially going to give up on trying to read Grady Hendrix books because I also read Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires and had a very similar experience. So just not an author for me, I don't think. But an author that I do enjoy is one I don't have to hold up again, but this is Scorpio Racers by Maggie Stiefvater. This is a very different book from The Raven Cycle that I'd read by Maggie Stiefvater. It's very, you still get the writing style, like it's still very much her writing that I enjoy. And I gave this one 4 stars. I think again the relationship, I do remember a bit more about these because we're in November now. The relationship between the 2 main characters was very good. It took a while for things to start happening for them. They didn't speak for quite a while at the beginning. Once they did start interacting, I had a great time. The actual sort of concept of the world, there is this sort of race that is happening, hence why it's called the Scorpio Racers, that I was sort of less invested in. There were moments of it that I really enjoyed, but I feel like that's probably why it was a 4-star as opposed to a 5, is that there was just some things with like the pacing and the world building, but I was very invested in the characters, so it still made it a very enjoyable read. Then another one that is downstairs, so I haven't gone to grab it, but it is A Wake Up Call by Beth O'Leary. This is the latest Beth O'Leary book. I've read all of her books so far, I believe, and this one I did enjoy. I feel like it was a little bit like fluffier than some of the other ones in a way. Like there were definitely still things that happened, but having read her last book, The No Show, which felt like there was like a lot happening in that one, this felt a little bit more light-hearted in places, and I enjoyed that, to be honest. It has, I wouldn't call it a Christmas book, but it's set around Christmas, so it has sort of that nice kind of festive vibe to it, which I think worked better with it being a little bit more lighthearted. And yeah, I just had a good time. It's about people working together at a hotel and them not necessarily being the best of friends, but then having to work together to kind of save the hotel over the festive period. And there is a lot of miscommunication in this book, but I think it's handled very well, because miscommunication, I mean, happens in pretty much every romance, but sometimes it can be like you just want to yell at them, and this time I was like, oh, and I can see why it's happened. I still want to yell at you, but I can understand it. The next book that I read was the third book in a companion series. I believe it should be the last book. There are no more friends to talk about. So it is Iris Kelly Doesn't Date by Ashley Herring Blake. I have really enjoyed this trilogy as a whole. This is probably my second favourite. My favourite is still Delilah Green Doesn't Care. There was something about that one that I just got hooked on and read very, very quickly. I really like Iris as a character. This one has a theatre setting going on, which is always something I'm going to enjoy in books. My only issue with this is that the actual resolution to like the third act conflict just felt very ridiculous, like very quickly handled, and I was just like, I feel like we could have just done, I feel like we built up to this quite well, and then everything felt very rushed at the end. But other than that, I did still have a good time reading it. And then my next book that I read, do you remember when I read 2 Rebecca Ross books earlier on in this video and I said I would talk about another one later on? Yes, I finally jumped on the hype train for Divine Rivals. This book has been everywhere this year. Everyone has been yelling about it. I understand why. It's so good. I can't wait to read the sequel. I have it ordered. It should be arriving at my house in the next week. This one, whereas with the other Rebecca Ross series, I said that I felt like, while I liked the characters and things, it felt like the first one did a lot of building and not much happened. This felt like a lot actually did happen, and I was really invested in the world as well as the characters. The characters, incredible. The romance with like Iris and Roman, so good. The sort of enemies to lovers storyline of it, well, rivals to lovers, incredible. Like, I have no notes on it, but I did also really get invested in the world, although it's a weird one where there is sort of like this quiet, like there is a war happening throughout this book, but you're not like, that's not the focus of what we're seeing the characters more, but obviously this has very much affected their life throughout it. And then obviously as things sort of progress, that becomes more of a focus. But I feel like that could have been handled very badly. It could have been suddenly like out of nowhere, like, oh yeah, by the way, do you remember this is happening? But it didn't feel like that. It felt like everything had the right balance of sort of, like you said, you really got connected to their romance and to them, but then you still had that undercurrent of like the situation that they were in. And then when that started to come more apparent towards the end of the book, I'm very scared of where the second one's going to go, but I'm also very, very excited because she did not let me down with her concluding part of the previous duology that I read. The second part was my favourite, so I'm hoping that it happens again with this. We will see. Then I read a novella, which is Snowplace Like LA by Julie Murphy and Sierra Simone. This one is a novella in between 2 other books in their Christmas rom-com series, although this one is set in the summer, so it's set in July instead. It is a sort of spicy Christmas romance where basically it's about this group of people who are making like Hallmark type Christmas movies, but a lot of them used to work in the porn industry. It's a strange concept for a book. It works. I will say the novella is probably my least favourite of the 3. I read the first one last year. I read the second one later on. You'll see me talk about it soon, but there are bits that I really liked about it. There were bits of it that were just kind of ridiculous as well, but like that's any romance. But I just felt like maybe because it is a novella and because we'd sort of this couple had already got together like in the background of the first book, and then this was kind of like the entire book was like their third act conflict, and I just felt like I would have liked to have seen more of them just be like happy and like having seen that relationship build more rather than it just being something that I was aware of in the background in the first one. So I didn't feel as connected to them, if that makes sense. Anyway, moving on to probably one of my most disappointing reads of the year, and I'm really, really sad to say that, but it is A Curse for True Love by Stephanie Garber. I gave this one 2 stars. I know I've not been doing star ratings for a lot of these, but I feel like you need to know that I gave this one 2 stars. I can't say too much about why it disappointed me without really spoiling things, but essentially there is a character that I really liked in this who didn't appear, who is a very central character to the plot, who did not appear in this book until quite a while into it, and then it just felt like that they were sidelined, and it felt like everything that we were building up to in the first 2 were just like, it felt like she didn't care about it, and everything then when it did sort of conclude felt very rushed, and I got bored. I just didn't care about how it was happening, and I was happy with how things ended up, but not happy with the route to get there. I think that's probably the best way to explain it. But yeah, probably my most disappointing read of the year, because the first two got 5 stars. I was so hyped for this, and yeah, I have 2 copies of this now as well, and it makes me sad. Okay, the next book that I read, I've kind of already spoken about a little bit because I spoke about the first book in the series, but it is Gemina by J. Christopher and Amy Kaufman. And the same things that I said for Illuminate, I read the audiobook and the physical book at the same time for this. It really enhanced the experience of it. I do think you do need to read the physical one for this because there is a lot of artwork in here as well. This is my favourite one in the series, partly because of some of the tropes that are used, like the sci-fi tropes that are used, but also just because I really like Hannah and Nick as well. And I am currently reading Obsidia. I'm going to talk about it in this wrap up because I'm so close to the end of it, but like, and I know what happens, so it's fine. But I'm really glad that I've reread the series because it's just been fun. It's been fun to talk about it as well with Lisa and Meg, and the live show for Obsidia may have already happened by the time this video goes up, but if not, it's going to be on my channel, so you can either watch it back or you can watch it when it's happening, which is the 3rd of January 2024. Then the next book that I read, we're getting close to the end, I promise. We're in December, we're very much in December now, and I read just a lot of Christmas romances this month, so we're going to be quite quick talking about these. The first one being Holly Jolly Ever After. This is the 3rd book in that series that I've already mentioned, the one by Julie Murphy and Sierra Simone. This one I liked more than the novella because I did get to see the romance build, but also there were issues that I had with it in terms of there is a trope that is used in this and I know a lot of people don't like. I don't hate it and I didn't mind it being used in this, but then there were some of the ways that it was handled afterwards that I was just like just getting a bit annoyed with the characters, but overall still had a fun time. I just think the first one that I read last year is like superior. Then I read Foul Heart Huntsman by Chloe Gong. This is the concluding part of the duology that I don't actually know what the name of it is, but it started with Foul Lady Fortune. I can't say too much about this because I just said that this, if you talk about this series too much, you're going to spoil the first series, which is the These Violent Delight series. But essentially it follows one of the characters from that series, which is a Romeo and Juliet retelling. This one, I did like how it sort of brought back a lot more things to do with the first series. It gave us a lot of answers because that first series, whilst it does conclude, it does feel like there is definitely more coming from that world, which obviously there was. And this felt like it tied up a lot. Sometimes I felt like maybe gave us like just a bit too much. It was like, okay, well you've kind of made things just a bit too simple here. But overall I did really enjoy this, especially as I've said every time I talk about this book, the main character in this was a character I did not like in the first duology, and I really enjoyed her journey throughout this. So obviously Chloe Gong has done something right with her writing to get me to actually root for this character. Then I read Make Your Mind This Christmas by Lizzie Huxley Jones. This concept of essentially somebody fake dating somebody to then and going to spend Christmas with their family and then falling in love with the person they're fake dating sister has been done quite a few times in recent years. This one actually came out last year and I didn't read it then, partly because I just ran out of time and partly because I read another one of the same concept within the year and that I really loved. It was Alison Cochran's Kiss Her Once for Me, and I didn't want to kind of read them so close together. I think that probably was a wise choice because I did really enjoy this one. I do think I still preferred Kiss Her Once for Me, and I know I did. I gave one 5 stars, I gave one 4 stars, but I did appreciate this one. I think they both took like very different routes of it. I really liked the romance that built between the 2 main characters in this. There was also some disability rep in there as well. There was some like just ridiculous things that happened throughout the book, but like that's kind of how I would expect these things to go. It's a Christmas romance and I had a good time. There's not much else to say about it. There is another book that I'm going to talk about later on that did this sort of particular storyline as well and did not handle it well, so this is the one that I really enjoyed this year. Then I read Heartstopper Volume 5. This was of course a 5 star. I love this so much. I actually read these in a slightly different way because I am subscribed to Alison's Patreon, so I get pages every day when they write one, when they are writing them. They're on hiatus at the minute, so I had read all of this already, which means it is a slightly different reading experience for me because I'm not sort of just being like, because I'm not sort of taking it in all at once. Like I knew everything that happened, but I knew it over the space of many months. But I do always like to go back and actually read them once I get the bind up, because then you just get to take in the cuteness of the storyline, and this one was very cute. It was also just very much full of horny teenagers throughout it, which was like an interesting thing to read, an interesting direction for the series to go. I mean, it's kind of where I did appreciate that it was like a little bit more lighthearted than some of the heavier topics that we'd had in like the last couple of volumes. And I'm so sad that there's only one more volume of Heartstopper left, but also I'm very like ready to see the story wrap up and just see more cuteness between them. Although I do know that there's going to be more drama before we get to cuteness, because like I've read the novellas, I know the direction we're heading in. Then I listened to an audiobook of a Christmas romance by Talia Hibbert. It was called Merry Inkmas, and I really enjoy Talia Hibbert's writing when she's done like the Brown Sisters trilogy. And I read her other Christmas novella that she did last year or the year before, and I did really enjoy that one. This one is a slightly older one that she was just sort of promoting again this year, being like, oh, this is available. So I found it on Scribd and listened to it, and I do think I don't love her older writing as much as I love her more recent writing. Her more recent writing is leaning towards sort of like cuter rom-coms, and like this is still a romance, but it's just not the same sort of vibe as what I get from her newer stuff. And I'm still glad I listened to it, but just not my favourite Talia Hibbert that I have ever read. Then we have 'Tis the Damn Season, and this book, who is the author? It is Kimmy Freeman, and I have a bone to pick with Kimmy Freeman because like, so 'Tis the Damn Season is a Taylor Swift song title, and this book I believe was inspired by the Taylor Swift song, and I just feel like if you're going to do that, like really go all in with it, because they took like the very basics of it but then changed a lot of it and just wasted the potential of it. It wasn't well written, like there were issues with the plot anyway, and then it wasn't well written, and I just didn't have a good time. And I'm gonna move on because I don't want to be negative, but I didn't have a good time. The next book that I read, I do have somewhere in this room and I don't know where it is, but it is A Christmasaurus Carol by Tom Fletcher. This is the latest book in the Christmasaurus series. This one brings in elements of A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens as well. It's a fun time. Again, I'm not the target audience for this, but I do have a great time reading these books. I have read all of the Christmasaurus books now, and yeah, I don't have much else to say. I think they are really, really good kids books. Then I read The Christmas Swap by Talia Samuels. This is the other fake dating, fell in love with the sister sort of storyline, and this is the one that I did not enjoy as much this year. There were elements of it that I liked, but also like the way that the actual sort of like her and the sister getting together happened was so badly handled. Like no one seemed to give any consideration to the guy that she was fake dating and how the family would react to when like they eventually found out. No one seemed to like be worried about it all, which felt very strange. Like that's been a key plot point in the other two that I've read, and this one no one just seemed to care. They all just seemed like genuinely horrible people, and yeah, not really much else to it. Like it was fine. It again, like the writing wasn't great, so it wasn't my favourite, but nothing else to say. The next Christmas romance that I read, actually the last Christmas romance, this is Wrapped with a Bow. It's by Lily Vale. This one I actually really enjoyed. This one felt like the Hallmark movie that I wanted it to be. It is basically about somebody who lives in a town where a Christmas film was made many years ago, and then they're going to do a sequel to the Christmas film, but it all relies on them being able to film in this particular house, and the owner of the house has recently died, and it is her nephew that now owns it, and they've got to like convince him to let them film in the place. And the main character like works on the film set. She lives in the town, but she also like is a liaison for the film crew, and it's like a grumpy sunshine romance, and I had a good time with it. It was an audiobook. I listened to it on like Christmas Eve and I had a great time. So this one was finally the Christmas romance that I wanted this year, because I feel like last year I read Christmas romance that I really liked, because I read the Alison Cochrane one, and I was a bit worried this year that like all the ones I'd read, I liked Make Your Mind This Christmas, but I was like, then I read a like series of ones that I was less impressed with, so I was glad that I sort of bookended it with one that I did enjoy. And then, we're so close to the end, then I read Lore Olympus Volume 5. I've already discussed my feelings on Lore Olympus earlier on in this, but as I said, I particularly like where the series is leading. The Volume 5 really started to like step it up in terms of the Hades and Persephone relationship, and I'm so glad that we're getting to see more of that now. I love them so much. I really, really like the art style in these books, and this one in particular is one where I finished it and I'm like, I need Volume 6 immediately, and it's not actually out yet. I could go and read it on Webtoons, but I'm going to wait. I do have Volume 6 pre-ordered, I think. I should check that. But anyway, then the last new book that I read this year, it actually, spoiler alert, managed to make its way onto my favourite books of the year. So I'm really glad that I read this one. It is an arc of a book that is due out next year. It is An Education in Malice by S.T. Gibson. S.T. Gibson previously wrote Dowry of Blood, which I really, really enjoyed last year. And this is set in the same world as Dowry of Blood. There is some characters that cross over between, but it is a very different type of book. Dowry of Blood is told in more of like a letter format. It's the main character sort of writing to somebody, and that's because it's inspired by Dracula, so it's sort of taking on elements of that. This one is set more recently it's set in, I believe it was the 60s. It's got kind of like a dark academia vibe to it. It's inspired by Carmilla. I think it's quite loosely inspired by Carmilla, but I haven't read Carmilla, so I can't really give you any like specifics on that. But I just found myself really absorbed in this world. The writing, whilst it was like a different format, it was more sort of like typical prose. The actual writing style was something that I still really enjoyed. It was still sort of had the quality of it that I enjoyed in Dowry of Blood, like sort of the lyricism of it. And I'm very excited to read S.T. Gibson's other book that's coming out in 2024, Evocation, because the storyline of that one interested me more, and having read 2 books by this author now that I really enjoyed, I can't wait to read more from them. And then the last book that I have to talk about is Obsidio, which, like I said, I am actually reading at the minute. I could grab it to hold up here. This one actually is very close by. It looks like I'm like only about halfway through, which I am technically, but like the audiobook is really fast and also it's mixed media. It's like it reads very quickly, but I'm having a good time reading this. I can tell you now that it's going to be a 5-star again, because this is the first time I've reread it. I know how everything ties up, and it's really interesting seeing how that all sorts into place like throughout the series. But if you want to see my thoughts on this, as I said, the live show is going to be on my channel on the 3rd of January. I do not know when this video is going up, so it's either already there or it's there for you to watch soon. Enjoy. I have been talking for so long, and I've done 2 of these videos now that are this long, so I'm just gonna say thank you guys for watching. Please like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff down below. I will be back with a favourite books of the year video soon, as well as all my other content that I have planned for the next couple of weeks. But let me know if there is anything that you've read recently that you really enjoyed, and I will see you guys soon with a new video. Bye.